vision called National Urban Livelihood Mission in today's session. Hello students, welcome to the course Urban Local Governance. I am Padmavati, Assistant Professor, Department of Management Studies, College of Engineering Kindi, Anna University, Chennai. Well students, we will learn about, after going through this module, we will be able to explain about the National Urban Livelihood Mission's background, its objective, its guiding principles, its values and strategies, and major components composed of this particular mission, and also the mission outcomes. The National Urban Livelihoods Mission, what we call in short as NULM, is a flagship program of the Government of India, launched on 24th September 2013 with an objective of reducing poverty and vulnerability of urban poor by providing them with gainful self-employment and skilled wage employment opportunities. The scheme aims to provide basic amenities and infrastructure to the urban poor and provide them with access to institutional credit for setting up micro enterprises. The scheme also has been implemented in 4,449 cities and towns across the country, benefiting more than 7.5 million urban poor households. This module provides an overview of National Urban Livelihoods Mission Scheme, its objectives, guiding principles, values and strategies, components, implementation procedures, outcomes, and its achievements. If you look at the rationale behind the mission, the National Urban Livelihoods Mission Scheme was launched with the aim of reducing urban poverty and vulnerability of urban poor by providing them with gainful self-employment and skilled wage employment opportunities. If you look at urban poverty in India is a significant problem with a large number of people living in slums and informal settlements with limited access to basic amenities and opportunities for employment as well. Hence, the scheme recognizes the need to provide the urban poor with access to basic amenities, infrastructure, and institutional credit, which will enable them to generate their livelihoods and improve their quality of life. In India, most of the urban poor are involved in informal sector activities, where there is a constant threat of eviction, removal, confiscation of goods, and almost non existent social security cover. Even when segments of urban populations are not income poor, they face deprivation in terms of lack of access to sanitary living conditions, and their well being is hampered by discrimination. Also, through social exclusion, crime, violence, insecurity of tenure, hazardous environmental conditions, and lack of voice in the governance as a whole. And if you look at the dimensions of urban poverty, can be broadly divided into three categories as per the ministries. Number one, resident vulnerability, which includes access to land, shelter, basic services, etc. Social vulnerability, which includes deprivations related to factors like gender, age, social stratification, lack of social protection, inadequate voice and participation in the governance structure, etc. Thirdly, we have occupational vulnerability. This includes precarious livelihoods, dependence on informal sector for employment and earnings, lack of job security, poor working conditions, etc. Amongst the urban poor, there are sections subject to greater vulnerability in terms of the set classification, and these includes women, children, the aged, scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, minorities, differently abled persons who deserve attention on a priority basis. Hence, the National Urban Livelihood Mission, what in short we call it as NULM, was launched by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Poverty Alleviation and Government of India in 24th September 2013 by replacing the existing Swarna Jayanti Saharadi Rozgar Yojana. The NULM will focus on organizing urban poor in their strong grassroots level institutions, creating opportunities for skill development, leading to market based employment, and helping them to set up self employment ventures by ensuring easy access to credit. The mission is aimed at providing shelter equipped with essential services to the urban homeless in a phased manner. In addition to this, the mission also addresses livelihood concerns of the urban street vendors. So, the urban poverty being multidimensional in nature, and it includes various vulnerabilities faced by the poor in cities and towns, as we have just discussed about the occupational, residential, and social vulnerabilities needs to be addressed simultaneously in a comprehensive and integrated manner. And residential vulnerability issues are being addressed through programs like Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Urban, and other two vulnerabilities, namely occupational and social vulnerabilities, can be best addressed by creating opportunities for skill development, leading to market based employment and helping them to set up self employment ventures, etc. The urban poverty alleviation programs need to be based on skill development and easy access to credit. So, in this context, the mission mode approach to urban livelihood has been considered necessary in the form of what we call it as National Urban Livelihood Mission. Also, we call this mission as Deen Dayal Antyodaya Yojana National Urban Livelihood Mission. So, if you look at the objective of this mission is to reduce poverty and vulnerability of the urban poor households by enabling them to access self-employment, skilled wage employment opportunities, resulting in an appreciable improvement in their livelihoods on a sustainable basis through building strong grassroots level institutions of the poor. And the mission also aims at providing shelter equipped with essential services to the urban homeless in a phased manner. In addition to this, the mission also addresses livelihood concerns of the urban street vendors by facilitating their access to suitable spaces, institutional credit, social security, and skills to the urban street vendors for accessing emerging market opportunities. If you look at the mission's guiding principle, the core belief of this particular mission is that the poor are entrepreneurial and have innate desire to come out of the poverty. So the challenge here is to unleash their capabilities to generate meaningful and sustainable livelihoods. As a first step in this process is motivating the urban poor to form their own institutions, and they and their institutions need to be provided sufficient capacity so that they can manage an external environment, access finance, expand their skills and enterprise, and etc. And this requires continuous and carefully designed hand-holding support. So as an external and dedicated sensitive support structure from the national level to the city and community level is required to induce social mobilization, institution building, and livelihood promotion. This particular mission believes that any livelihood promotion programs can be scaled up in a time bound manner only if driven by poor and their institutions. So, such a strong institutional platform support the poor in building up their own human, social, financial, and other assets in the country. So, in this turn, enables them access to rights, entitlements, opportunities, services from the public and private sectors while enhancing their solidarity, voice, and bargaining power in the country. If you look at as per the Constitutional 74th Amendment Act 1992, the urban poverty alleviation is a legitimate function of the urban local bodies. Therefore, the urban local bodies need to undertake a lead role for all issues and programs concerning the urban poor in the cities and towns, which includes skill and livelihoods. Therefore, this particular mission aims at universal coverage of the urban poor for skill development and credit facilities. It will strive for skills training of the urban poor for market based jobs and self employment, facilitating easy access to the credit. And this mission also includes street vendor constitute an important segment of the urban population at the bottom of the pyramid. So the street vending provides a source of self-employment to them. Urban homeless persons who live without shelter or social security protection are the most vulnerable class, even while they contribute towards sustaining the cities with their cheap labor. So accordingly, this particular mission aims at providing shelter equipped with essential services to the urban homeless in a phased manner, as I earlier mentioned. And this particular mission also places a very high emphasis on convergence with the schemes and programs of the relevant line ministries, departments, and programs of the state government dealing with skills, livelihoods, entrepreneurship development, health, education, social assistance, etc. So, this particular mission aims at partnership with the private sector in providing skill training, employment, and operation of shelters for homeless. So now let's look at the mission's value. This particular mission, National Urban Livelihood Mission, the following values what we're going to learn now. Number one is the ownership and productive involvement of urban poor and their institutions in all the process. Number two, transparency in program design, implementation, including institutional building and capacity strengthening. Number 3 is accountability of government functionaries and the community. Number 4, partnership with industry and other stakeholders. And lastly, we have community self-reliance, self-dependence, and self-help and mutual help as concern. All these major 5 points have become the mission's important values. And if you look at the strategy of this mission, building capacity of urban poor and their institutions and the machinery involved in the implementation of livelihood development, poverty alleviation programs through hand-holding support is happened to be the important strategy of this particular mission. It also includes enhancing and expanding existing livelihoods options of the urban poor. It also includes building skills to enable access to growing market-based job opportunities offered by emerging urban economies. Also, training and support for the establishment of micro enterprises by the urban poor self and group, ensure availability and access to the urban homeless population to permanent 24-hour shelters, including the basic infrastructural facilities like water supply, sanitation, safety, and security. And this also include cater to the needs of specially vulnerable segments of the urban homeless like the dependent children, aged, disabled, mentally ill, and recovering patients, etc., can be the vulnerable groups. And this particular aspect also includes to establish strong right-based linkages with other programs which cover the right of urban homeless to food, healthcare, education, etc. And also to address livelihood concerns of the urban street vendors by facilitating the access to suitable spaces, institutional credit, social security, skills to the urban street vendors for accessing the emerging marketing opportunities. So this happened to be the important strategies, whatever we have just learned with respect to this National Urban Livelihood Mission. Whereas with regard to the coverage of this particular mission, the mission will be implemented in all district headquartered towns and all other cities with a population of 1 lakh or more as per 2011 census. So the primary target of this particular mission is the urban poor, including the urban homeless. And if you look at the coverage, it may be broadened to include families of disadvantaged groups like scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, women, minorities, disabled, etc. and subject to a maximum of 25% of the above urban poor population. And look at the modalities and functions. This particular mission is implemented through 3-tier structure. Number 1, urban livelihood mission, state urban livelihood mission, city livelihood centers. Let's look at each of their functions. So the National Urban Livelihood Mission is responsible for the overall implementation and monitoring of evolution at the national level. It provides technical and financial support to the state and city level agencies and coordinates with various stakeholders for the effective implementation of the mission. If you look at the state urban livelihood missions, they are responsible for implementation of the scheme at the state level. They coordinate with the city level agencies for the effective implementation of the scheme. And at the city level, city livelihood centers, what we call it as in short CLCs, they are established at the city level and are responsible for implementation of the scheme at the grassroots level. And they also identify and mobilize the urban poor, provide them with vocational training and skill development programs, and assist them with setting up micro enterprises. They also provide access to credit and other support services for urban poor. Check our understanding with what we have understood from the past discussion with a question. So, what is the objective of National Urban Livelihood Mission? Your options are achieving garbage-free status, to ensuring 100% municipal solid waste management, to address the challenge of rural poverty, to reduce poverty and vulnerability of the urban poor. Your answer is to reduce poverty and vulnerability of urban poor. Let's look at the mission's components. There are about 7 important components of this annual mission, namely social mobilization and institutional development, capacity building and training program, employment through skill training and placement, self-employment program, shelter for urban homeless, support to urban street vendors, innovative and special projects. So let's look at one by one. Number 1, social mobilization and institutional development. So this mission envisages universal social mobilization of urban poor into self-help groups and their federations, At least one member from each urban household, preferably a woman, should be brought under the self help group network in a time bound manner. These groups will serve as a support system for the poor to meet their financial and social needs. Normally, women's self help groups will be formed, and however, the male self help groups of handicapped persons will be allowed to be formed under this mission. And the mission also emphasizes on the mobilization of vulnerable sections of the urban population, such as what we've just learned so far, from the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, minority, female-headed households, persons with disabilities, destitutes, migrant laborers, and especially vulnerable occupational groups such as street vendors, rag pickers, domestic workers, beggars, construction workers, etc. So, under this particular component, we also have building community constitutions of self-help groups and their federations. So, self-help groups will federate at slum ward level into an area level federation, what we call it as ALF. These area level federations will organize into federations at the city level. These two federations will be a registered bodies under this mission. So, for catalyzing the formation of self-help groups, these federations and to promote financial inclusions of self-help group members under this mission, the resource organizations will be engaged to facilitate the formation of self-help groups and their development and bank linkages, formation of the federations at the area and city levels, training and capacity building, establishing links to urban local bodies, and to mitigate social, occupational, and residential vulnerabilities. And if you look at the component also includes universal financial inclusion, means this particular mission aims to achieve universal financial inclusions through opening of basic saving accounts, facilitating access to financial literacy, credit affordable insurances, remittance facilities to urban poor and their institutions. And it also coordinates with financial institutions to encourage the use of ICTs based technologies and community facilitators like bank mitras, bima mitras for the benefit of urban poor. So, in particular, this particular mission facilitates the coverage of urban poor households under the scheme such as Rashtriya Swachh Bima Yojana, Jan Shri Bima Yojana, and similar programs. And revolving fund support to self-help groups and their federations are basically envisaged through this mission, that the thrift and credit societies, functional literacies, basic skills training would be main trinity of the activities of this SHGs group. And a revolving fund support to the tune of rupees 10,000 for self-help group will be provided to SHGs with more than 70% urban poor members, and those have not availed such support earlier. Next component, which is capacity building and training. So the key objective of this capacity building and training component is to transform the role of Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs and state agencies in charge of urban poverty alleviation into providers of high quality technical assistance in the fields of urban livelihood promotion and urban poverty alleviation. So, as part of this capacity building, there will be a technical support at state, national, state, and city levels. So, the objective of this subcomponent is to establish timely and high quality technical assistance at central, state, and city levels to rule out the implement of this mission. So, this National Mission Management Unit will be established at the center, and there will be a mission unit called State Mission Management Unit, and City Mission Management Unit will be established with good quality livelihood and program management professionals and developing efficient institutional systems like HR, MIS, financial management systems, and procurement and social management systems in place. And mission management unit will be established at the center state level. This particular mission, cities will be dedicated as technical support. So we also have a component called employment through skills training and placement. So this component of providing assistance for development, upgrading of skills of urban poor so as to enhance their capacity for self-employment and salaried employment. And this employment through skills and training placement intend to provide training to the urban poor as per the skill development and skill demand from the market, so that they can set up self-employment ventures or secure salaried employment. And this will target the urban poor subjected to occupational vulnerability. And no minimum and maximum educational qualification is prescribed for the selection of beneficiaries under this particular component. and the percentage of women beneficiaries under this component shall not be less than 30%, whereas SCSTs must be benefited at least to the extent of proportion of their strength in the city and town population of poor. A special provision of 3% reservation should be made for differently abled under this program. Apart from this, their special attention will be paid to the skill upgradation of vulnerable groups like beggars, rat pickers, construction workers, destitutes, etc. And this component also includes skill training will be linked to accreditation and certification, preferably be undertaken on a public private partnership, what we call it as PPP mode, and it will involve reputed institutes including ITIs, polytechnics, NITs, industry associations, engineering colleges, management institutes, skill training centers, foundations, NSDC, and other reputed entities in government, private, and civil society sectors. The selection of these institutions and agencies to impart skills training shall be subject to a transparent process verification of brand image and quality of the instructions. And number 4, the important component is happen to be the self-employment programs, what we call it as SEPs. This particular component will focus on financial assistance to individuals and groups of urban poor for setting up gainful self-employment ventures, micro enterprises suited to their skills, training, and aptitude and local conditions. The underemployed and unemployed urban poor will be encouraged to set up small enterprises relating to manufacturing, servicing, and petty business for which there is a considerable local demand. And local skills and local crafts should be particularly engaged in that case. And each city, town should be developed a compendium of such activities and projects, keeping in view skills available, marketability of products, cost, economic viability, etc. And this component also includes self-help group bank linkages as interest subsidy over and above 7% rate of interest will be applicable to all the SHGs accessing a bank loan. An additional 3% interest subventions will be provided to all women self-help groups to repay their loan in time in all their cities. This is as a part of self-employment programs. And in addition to this, a credit card for enterprise development will also be provided. So under this component, efforts will be made to cover beneficiaries with credit cards for working capital and other purposes. It also includes technology, marketing, and other support. So this includes the such kind of support may also be provided by states and to the beneficiaries in setting up of micro enterprises. And in followed by this component, we also have a component named support to urban street vendors. So this component aims at skilling of street vendors, support micro enterprises development, credit enablement, pro vending urban planning, along with supporting social security options for vulnerable groups such as women, SCSTs, and minorities. So up to 5% of the total NULM budget will be spent on this component. Pro vending urban planning. So under this mission, state and cities will conduct a periodic social economic survey of the street vendors, register street vendors, and will issue identity cards for street vendors. A database of street vendors will be developed, maintained at each city. So this will enable the state and urban local bodies to prepare pro vending urban planning and to provide space for street vending. It also includes skill development and micro enterprise development support for street vendors. This component also includes skill development and micro enterprise development support for street vendors. So under this scheme, poor and economically weaker section street vendors in urban areas can access skill training under this component of employment skill training and program, and micro enterprise development support under the SCP component of this mission. And it also includes street vendors will be encouraged to access basic banking services through credit enablement of street vendors as part of this program. It also includes development of vendor markets, social security convergence through various other programs. Followed by, we have a component called Scheme of Shelter for Urban Homeless. The main aim of this particular component is to provide shelter and all other essential services to the poorest of the poor segment of urban societies. So the shelters should be permanent, all weather 24/7 shelters for the urban homeless for every 1 lakh urban population. Provision should be made for permanent community shelters, minimum of 100%. Depending upon local conditions, each shelter should cater to between 50 to 100%. So the priority would be given to cities with populations above 1 million in census of 2011, and other cities and towns identified by the government of India, state government, to be of special social, historical, tourist importance. For shelter planning purpose, a space of 50 square feet or 5 square feet meters per person may be taken as minimum space to be provided. The basic common facilities such as water, sanitation, electricities need to be provided for the shelters for the dignified human living. Also, linkage with Anganwadi, PHC, childcare facilities, and other social assistance program, etc., may be ensured through this mission. And it also helps to engage with the entitlements of shelters. Should be a space for convergence and provisions of various entitlements of social security, food, education, and healthcare systems. All homeless persons in the shelter should be given priority under the various schemes and government programs. This is because the homeless are unable to access many services due to lack of documentary proof such as address and birth proof, etc. And if you look at the location of shelters, the location should be close to homeless concentrations and work sites as far as practicable. They may be loaded close to the areas where the poorest concrete, like railway stations, bus depots, terminal markets, sometimes the wholesale mandis, etc. So therefore, the urban development projects formation and implementation, what we call as UDPFI guidelines, the and master plans may be suitably amended to permit constructions of such shelters in public and semi-public use zones. And design of shelters should be in such a way that it is permanent and it may be built of concrete and durable and weatherproof alternate structures, etc. And lastly, we have a component called innovative and special projects. This component will focus on the promotion of novel initiatives in the form of innovative projects. These initiatives may be in the nature of pioneering efforts aimed at catalyzing the sustainable approaches to urban livelihoods through public, private, and community partnerships. So the project must demonstrate the strategies to create long-term and sustainable livelihood opportunities and may cover organizations of the urban poor, formulation and implementations of innovative skill development programs, etc. So if you look at the administration other expenses, generally 2% of the allocation under this mission can be utilized at the state, center and city levels for administration. And 3% of allocations under this mission can be utilized at center, state and city levels for the purpose of IEC, which is information, education and communication purpose. And administration of this particular mission's administration and structure, if you look at, it will have a three-tier independent structures, as we were just explained a couple of slides ago. And looking at the monitoring and evaluation process, given the geographical scale and magnitude of the resources and activities to be supported by this mission, a comprehensive and robust IT-enabled what we call it as NULM MIS would be established for tracking of the targets and achievements. So the state and union territories be part of required to submit a progress reports online to help the mission directorates to monitor efficiently. And if you look at the guidelines for implementation, the mission directorate in the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Government of India, will issue a set of detailed operational guidelines from time to time for each component and sub-component of this mission. And if you look at the summary of the outcomes of the mission, this particular mission has led several positive outcomes since its implementation in 2013. We will highlight some of them. Number one, livelihood enhancement. So this scheme has provided gainful self-employment and skilled wage employment opportunities to the urban poor. Number two, basic amenities and infrastructure. So this particular mission has provided basic amenities and infrastructure to the urban poor, which include provision for water supply, sanitation, solid management, street lighting, other infrastructure facilities, etc. Social empowerment, skill development, financial inclusion has become an important outcome of this particular mission because it helps empowering the social vulnerable groups such as urban poor, especially women and other vulnerable groups. And it also helps to emphasize on skill development of urban poor. It helps enable the urban poor to have this financial inclusions, able to have microfinance in contact with microfinance institutions and banks for setting up micro enterprises, etc. So far we have learned about mission, objective, components and entirety of this particular Deen Dayal Antyodaya National Urban Livelihoods Mission. So let's have our understanding in the second part of our presentation. So with this question, what are not the components of National Urban Livelihood Mission? I repeat the question, what are not the components of National Urban Livelihood Mission? So your options are self-employment program, capacity building and training programs, shelter for rural homeless, support to urban street vendors. So your option is shelter for rural homeless, because this particular mission is aimed at offering shelter for urban homeless. So that's the option out from the other three options. So far we have learned about National Urban Livelihood Missions, its background, objective, guiding principles, values and strategies, major components and mission outcomes, etc. Thank you.